Hey gang, Doumitt here. Say, the holiday seasons are upon us. We have a really cool gift idea. We bought some brand new empty cigar boxes.
For years, Gold Rush fans believed Chris Doumitt's quiet exit from Parker Schnabel's crew was just another behind-the-scenes decision. Routine, uneventful, nothing personal. But now, that illusion has shattered. Chris has finally broken his silence, and what he reveals is far more intense, emotional, and unexpected than anyone imagined. This wasn't about retirement, it wasn't fatigue, and it definitely wasn't just a contract change. According to insiders, something happened off-camera, a turning point that strained loyalties and tested years of trust. Some say it started with a growing divide in Parker's operation. Others claim there was tension over long hours, mounting pressure, and decisions that pushed even the toughest crew members to the edge. But Chris, he stayed quiet. Until now. In today's video, we're uncovering the real reason Chris Doumitt walked away from one of the most successful crews in Gold Rush history, from emotional strain and explosive disagreements to a twist that nobody saw coming. This story changes everything you thought you knew. And before we dig into the truth, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear is just the beginning of a much bigger story unfolding behind the cameras. Now, let's get into it. He was never meant to be a miner. In fact, when Chris Doumitt first stepped onto a gold claim, he didn't even come looking for treasure. He came with a hammer. A skilled carpenter by trade, he'd been hired to build a cabin for the Hoffman crew. No cameras, no contracts, no gold fever. But fate has a way of rewriting a man's story when he's not looking. Somewhere between setting beams and laying boards, Chris picked up a shovel, then a wash plant assignment, and before anyone realized it, the quiet craftsman had become the crew's unexpected anchor. While others fought, floundered, or folded under pressure, Chris adapted with a calm that made him stand out. He wasn't just learning, he was mastering. When the Hoffmans began to drift and crumble, Chris didn't disappear with them. His work ethic, patience, and problem-solving caught the eye of someone younger, hungrier, and destined to change the show, Parker Schnabel. Bringing Chris onto his crew wasn't just a smart move, it was a strategic one. Parker needed experience, loyalty, and someone who didn't flinch when the cameras rolled or the pressure mounted. Chris delivered all three. To viewers, he became more than another miner. He was the man who never panicked, never bragged, and never chased drama. The wrinkles on his face told stories of hard seasons, but his eyes always held that calm resilience no gold price could shake. He wasn't the loudest voice on the claim, but when breakdowns hit or tempers flared, crews turned to him. Not because he demanded authority, but because he earned respect without asking for it. Over time, Chris transformed from a background figure to a fan favorite. He wasn't just operating equipment, he was saving seasons. When machinery failed, he fixed it. When morale dipped, he steadied it. When Parker's youth met the weight of $1 million deadline, Chris was the balance in the chaos. Viewers trusted him, Parker relied on him. The show needed him. And that's why his departure didn't just surprise people, it stunned them. Because legends don't walk away for no reason. Pressure builds, loyalties shift. And even the calmest men eventually reach a point where silence has its own story. But to understand why Chris Doumitt left, you first have to understand the world he stepped into next. The world shaped not by carpentry or kinship, but by a young boss whose ambition burned hotter than the engines they ran. Working under Parker Schnabel wasn't just a job, it was survival under a stopwatch. Every season began with a number, a target, a promise printed in gold, before a single shovelful hit the dirt. While most men his age were thinking about slowing down, Chris Doumitt found himself in the middle of a high-speed operation driven by a boss young enough to be his son, but fierce enough to command an empire. Parker didn't believe in taking days off. He didn't believe in slowing down. He believed in results. No matter the cost, the pay dirt had to move, the ounces had to stack, and the weather, the breakdowns, the exhaustion, they were just obstacles, never excuses. For the cameras, the crew looked like a well-oiled machine, but behind the roar of engines and the weight of gold tallies, something else was happening, something viewers couldn't always see. Men began to break in quiet ways. Fatigue dug deeper than any excavator. Voices raised after the cameras cut. Repairs stretched past midnight. Meals became afterthoughts. And Parker? He watched everything with the eyes of a man who feared time more than failure. Chris Doumitt remained the calm in the middle of this storm. He didn't argue. He didn't complain. He showed up, kept steady, and held the line when others cracked. But even the strongest steel feels heat, especially when pressure keeps rising with no release. There were moments, whispered about later, when the cracks showed. A long shift, followed by another. Equipment pushed past its limits. Promises made in meetings that came with unspoken sacrifice. Chris absorbed it all, but those closest to him began to notice the change. Slower steps, quieter responses, the kind of silence that said more than words. Parker admired him, trusted him, maybe even depended on him more than he realized. But leadership forged in youth and urgency doesn't always see the cost of its ambition. Parker's hunger for gold wasn't cruel. It was relentless. And in that relentlessness, lines blurred between dedication and demand. The audience never saw the full story. They saw gold totals, celebration shots, and the occasional argument patched up by next week's episode. What they didn't see were the nights spent welding in freezing rain, the decisions made in frustration, or the quiet glances exchanged when Parker pushed one step too far. And somewhere in that grind, in the unspoken tension between loyalty and limits, Chris reached a point that would change everything, not in anger, not in defiance, but in a quiet decision only a man who's seen too many winters can make. Because the breaking point doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in silence. Television tells a story, but it never tells the whole one. For every moment aired on Gold Rush, a dozen more were buried beneath edits, silence, or contracts signed long before the cameras rolled. And Chris Doumitt, the man who rarely raised his voice, carried more unseen weight than most viewers ever realized. Behind the calm smile and easy laugh, pressure had been building, slowly, quietly, and without warning. It wasn't one argument or one bad day. It was a stack of long nights, impossible deadlines, and the kind of tension that doesn't break loudly, it erodes slowly. Crew insiders spoke in half-truths and careful phrasing. Some remembered a dispute over equipment, who was responsible when a machine failed in the middle of production. Others whispered about workload, how a veteran like Chris was expected to carry more than the newer hands simply because he wouldn't complain. There were mentions of schedules that left no room for rest, of moments where communication failed, and of decisions made at the top that rippled quietly through the ranks. And then there was the element viewers never see. The pressure, not just from the mine, but from production. Cameras don't wait. Episodes don't rewrite themselves. When a machine breaks, when gold counts dip, when time runs out, someone has to take the hit. Sometimes that hit lands on the man who steps up, not the one who steps back. The breaking point didn't look like an explosion. It looked like weariness hiding behind routine. It sounded like silence instead of argument. It settled in places only those closest to Chris noticed. A pause before answering. A breath held longer than usual. A look that said he was somewhere else, even while he kept working. Those who worked beside him say, there was a moment. They won't name it, but they remember the shift. A conversation. Brief, sharp, maybe misunderstood. A decision passed down too quickly. A feeling that loyalty had limits, even for the steady one. No shouting, no walk-off, no dramatic farewell. Just a man realizing the weight he'd carried had finally become heavier than the reasons he carried it. And in that quiet moment, something broke. Not loudly, but finally. From the outside, it didn't make headlines. From the inside, it changed everything. And when Chris eventually made his move, those who were paying attention weren't surprised. They were just silent, because they knew why. But leaving a crew like Parker's isn't just about walking away. There are consequences, choices, and a future to rebuild. And while the cameras moved on, Chris had already stepped into the next chapter of his life, one that would take him far from the pressure that shaped his exit. When Chris Doumitt stepped away from Parker Schnabel's crew, many assumed the story had ended. A veteran miner leaving the grind? It sounded like retirement. Quiet, uneventful, and far from the cameras that once followed his every move. But Chris didn't disappear into the shadows. He didn't fade into the comfort of rest. Instead, he did something few expected. He reinvented himself. Freed from the relentless schedules and high-stakes pressure of the mine, Chris turned his attention to something he'd rarely had before, his own life. The man who once lived by radio calls, production deadlines, and frozen ground now chose his own hours, his own projects, and his own peace. And for the first time in years, he could breathe. He explored partnerships outside traditional mining, ventures that let him use his experience without sacrificing his sanity. Some were business-oriented, others were personal paths, delayed by the demands of the Yukon. Quietly, he remained active in the gold world, but on his terms, consulting, collaborating, and choosing when and where to dig. The roar of machinery was replaced with something foreign but welcome: control. But his exit did more than change his life. It changed the crew he left behind. His absence left a gap no replacement could fill. Younger miners suddenly had no anchor. Decisions became harder without his quiet guidance, and Parker, no matter how driven, could no longer lean on the dependable steady hand he'd taken for granted. Viewers noticed too. Fans flooded message boards, rolled theories across social media, and debated the silence surrounding his departure. Some insisted there had been tension. Others claimed he'd simply earned his rest. But the truth remained unspoken, tucked behind years of loyalty and a decision only he could make. Meanwhile, Chris stayed silent, not out of fear, but out of choice. While others chased the spotlight or stirred drama to stay relevant, he chose dignity over noise. He rebuilt without broadcast. He lived without explaining. And slowly, the man once defined by the mines began living a life defined by freedom. Yet silence carries weight. And eventually, the world wanted to know, why did he really leave? What happened behind those unfilmed moments? And what truth was Chris holding back all those years? Because a story like his doesn't end with a quiet exit. It ends when the man finally speaks. And that moment, after years of questions and whispers, is finally here. Next chapter. The truth revealed. Chris Doumitt speaks out. For years, the question lingered like a shadow across the Gold Rush legacy. Why did Chris Doumitt really leave Parker Schnabel's crew? Fans guessed. Insiders whispered. Entire threads of speculation grew into legend. Some blamed production pressure, others cited exhaustion, and a few believed there had been a silent fallout no one dared acknowledge. But then, after seasons of silence, Chris spoke. And it wasn't anger that shaped his words. It was honesty. He didn't point fingers. He didn't ignite controversy. Instead, he described a slow-burning truth, one forged in years of relentless work, endless expectations, and the quiet realization that even the strongest backs eventually grow tired of carrying more than they should. His departure, he revealed, wasn't one dramatic moment. It was the sum of many. Long nights, fixing machines in the dark, the weight of responsibility no one else claimed, and the growing gap between what he gave and what he could still give. Chris admitted there were frustrations, miscommunications, decisions made without warning, and a pace that left no room to breathe. But he didn't frame it as betrayal. He framed it as evolution. A man can serve a mission for years and still know when it's time to walk his own path. And while his respect for Parker remained, his loyalty to his own peace finally won. He spoke of the cameras, not with resentment, but with realism. The show, he said, tells a story. But the truth of life in the mud, cold, and pressure can't always fit between commercial breaks. What the audience saw was gold. What they didn't see was the cost. And then came the part no one expected. He didn't close the door on Gold Rush. He didn't denounce the crew. He left room. Room for understanding, room for change, room for a future that didn't have to mirror the past. His words didn't solve every mystery. In fact, they created new ones. Was there more to the story than he was willing to say? Did Parker know how close things came to breaking before Chris walked away? And could there be, someday, a return, a collaboration, or a reckoning? He ended not with bitterness, but with clarity. A man knows when he's done his part. And when it's time to move on, you don't wait for someone else to tell you, you just go. But as his voice faded, one truth became clear. His departure wasn't the end of the story. It was the turning point. Because when a quiet legend finally speaks, others start talking too. And now, the attention shifts, not to the man who left, but to the one he left behind. Next series focus: what Parker Schnabel really lost, and how it changed his operation forever. The story of Chris Doumitt doesn't end with a goodbye. It doesn't end with a tally of ounces or a shot of machinery glinting in the sunlight. What it leaves behind is far more enduring. A question, a void, and a ripple that runs through every corner of Parker Schnabel's world. For years, viewers saw the calm, competent man who quietly carried the weight of the claim. They saw him fix machines, steady tempers, and keep the crew afloat. But what they didn't see, the truth that only those close to him ever understood, was the subtle erosion of balance, the hidden tension, and the unspoken choice that would forever alter the landscape of one of television's most relentless mining operations. Chris walked away not with anger, not with resentment, but with clarity. He left behind a young, ambitious boss whose empire was still growing, but whose crew had lost its anchor. The mine's roar continued, but the silence he left behind was deafening. Every decision Parker made afterward, every late-night repair, every strategic gamble carried a shadow. The shadow of the man who had once been the glue, the steady hand, the voice of reason. Production cameras captured the gold, the sweat, and the drama. But even they couldn't film the subtle shifts, the glances, the silent acknowledgements of absence that changed the rhythm of the claim. Fans speculated endlessly. Social media threads debated loyalty, stress, and ambition. Was Chris pushed out, or did he step aside for something greater, something beyond the cameras? His eventual words gave some answers, but not all. He spoke of pressure, respect, and personal growth. He spoke of the quiet burden of responsibility and the moment when dedication met limits. But even his revelations left questions dangling in the air, questions that the show, the crew, and perhaps even Parker himself would wrestle with for seasons to come. And Parker, he kept going, as he always does. But something had changed. The crew dynamic shifted. Decisions that once flowed seamlessly now required negotiation, patience, and compromise. Mistakes carried heavier consequences. Achievements no longer felt like victories shared. They felt like triumphs weighed down by absence. The machinery roared, the gold glinted, and the cameras rolled, yet the narrative had subtly transformed. One man's departure had left more than a physical gap. It had left a mark on culture, trust, and ambition itself. Chris Doumitt's story is a reminder that legends are more than what we see on screen. They are defined by choices made quietly, by moments that never make headlines, and by courage to step away when everything demands you stay. The mine, the claim, the empire, none of it could contain him forever. And as he walks forward into new ventures, the echoes of his presence linger, reshaping history in ways only time will reveal. Yet the story doesn't end here. For every decision Chris made, every silence he left, there is a reaction still unfolding. Parker's empire continues to expand, but without Chris's steady hand, the pressures mount, alliances shift, and unseen tensions grow. The question remains, will the next season reveal a reconciliation, a reckoning, or a revelation even bigger than before? One thing is certain, Gold Rush is not just about gold. It's about the men who chase it, the choices they make, and the legacies they leave behind. And so the story closes. For now, the cameras may cut, the claims may quiet, but the ripples of one man's decision continue to travel. Chris Doumitt walked away, but his influence remains. Parker Schnabel presses on, driven, ambitious, and challenged. And the fans, they wait, knowing that in this world of ambition, loyalty, and gold, the next chapter is never far away. Because in Gold Rush, every ending is also a beginning, and some mysteries are only revealed with time.